When an IT business owner told me the industry was in trouble, I paid attention. Now, one of my most popular interviews is back to discuss the market. Marcus Olson, CEO of Pliancy, returns. Welcome to the Business of Tech Lounge, the live version of the Business of Tech podcast. It's Thursday, August 15th, 2024. And I'm Dave Sobel. We'll be taking questions and comments throughout the show, so make sure to put them in chat. This will be an interactive event allowing you to chat and comment all throughout the session, and I really do value that opportunity to interact with you. And if we need to, we'll break out for a listener-submitted question section as well. Now, I want to thank Sales Builder, our Patreon sponsor, whose support makes this show possible. Focus on your IT sales workflow with the power of automation and visit them at salesbuilder.com. That's BUILDR.com. And a reminder, I am watching that chat. Now, one of my most popular interviews and bonus episodes on the channel to date was my interview with the CEO of Pliancy, Marcus Olson. He made some big statements about the future of the industry, and I really appreciated his willingness to express a big and bold opinion. So I had to have him back. Marcus, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dave.
We had such a fun time talking last time, and I knew that a little bit later I'd want to follow up and hear a little bit about how things were going. Now, when we last talked, you were growing really rapidly with this unique model of no traditional sales team and going out to the market focused on very specific verticals. 2 years later, how's the business evolved, and have you made changes to your approach since then?
Well, obviously, the economy has gotten quite volatile, and we serve probably one of the most volatile parts of that economy, which is biotechs, venture capital, private equity. So it's been like a bit of a roller coaster where it's like a record quarter followed by a record disaster. So it's been a lot of whiplash and challenging. But the other side of that was, you mentioned the sales team. We do have 2 people in sales now. When you get to our size, I think we're like maybe 170 or something clients, and about 100 employees or so. You need them for the process, and you need them to communicate because you start to get a different experience, which is clients stumbling across your brand, or leads, I should say, stumbling across your brand or what you do, and calling in and asking questions like, hey, do you guys work with venture capital firms? And it's like plastered all over your website. And so they started to get, a lot of leads and a lot of noise. And so we do have a sales team now, but I'm still under the philosophy of trying to not scale a large sales team, but instead think about, how do you bring clients to your door through other means? And we launched another company that has been doing it's been helping support bring clients in. It's a different separate name and everything. We can get into that later if interested, but I'm still adamant that, I need to build a system to bring clients in and educate them on what we do, and not just throw manpower at it.
Gotcha. So you have sort of leaned into a little bit of that and systemized it. And it sounds like the real emphasis is on that systemization. Now, I want to actually hit on one of the things that intrigued me most now that we've caught up a little bit about where you're at. When we last talked, you talked a lot about the idea of disruption, and you really drew parallels to the idea of the taxi industry before Uber. We're a little further along here. Are you seeing signs of that disruption? You're looking out there and you're fighting off competitors and talking to different people. Are you seeing players that have emerged that look a little different or are more the Uber of MSPs?
Yeah, us. So I mentioned that other company that we launched. It's called Packit.io, Packit.io. And our philosophy or thought behind that offering, that company, was that what we were seeing keep in mind, we work with early stage startups. Some of those are large names now, but when we first started working with them, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they were a couple people. To this day, we're still primarily working with startups and then scaling them. And then they become our biggest clients. One of them went from 20 to like 3,000 people over the course of a couple of years. But in those early stages, it's still a big DIY mentality. It's still we don't really need an MSP yet. We don't need an IT consultant. It would be nice if we had one, but the barrier to entry to start working with an MSP because of the pricing models or because of the way they work is going from spending zero because the founders never value their time, to spending maybe a couple grand a month, depending on what solutions they're doing or whatever. And so there's this big gap. And a lot of times we would see these customers come to us, and I'm sure others have seen this too. They come to them when all the wheels are falling off the thing. They've done nothing right. They've been running in this DIY model for so long that they don't have proper security. They haven't set up anything properly. And now you got to untangle this mess. And for us, the biggest frustration that we kept running into is like one of our most talented teams. Like, I mean, it's like SEAL Team 7 or whatever, 6 is our onboarding team. Untangling that mess as rapidly as possible because the client has pain and we want to get them to the other side of that equation ASAP. They are incredible at that, but it's a very costly endeavor. It's a lot of communication. It's a lot of complexity. And we thought, well, what if we could just get ahead of that? It would save us money and them money. And so we started looking at, well, like, how do we get to these clients with a price point and an offering that makes sense where they go, I could DIY this, but I'd rather use you guys. And so we started building more self-service tooling and expanding the product that we had already built called our Pliancy admin, to the point where now our clients can log in, create users, reset MFA, reset passwords, sign apps, do all that sort of thing. So they have their own portal. So that's what we've been building. And the goal, of course, long-term is that those clients graduate to Pliancy. They get to the point where that doesn't work for them anymore. They're 30 people, whatever. And they go, well, we can easily migrate to Pliancy with a couple of clicks of a button, get a named consultant, work with a more full team. And that's really our idea, is like a lower cost offering with less complexity and barriers that allows us to get ahead of tech debt.
So but why split it out? Because it feels like a natural service connection between the two bits, like what you're doing with Pliancy, like having a version that's a starter version that they graduate to. It all feels like it would make a lot of sense as a single integrated business. Why split it out?
I love when people say it makes so much sense, because the smartest people in the world see the obvious, but that's not the way the world works. Rory Sutherland, he's a great marketer from Europe, said it best, and I quote this way more than I should. It's probably annoying, but he said, if you got the smartest people in the room and said, go compete with Coke, they would make a bigger can at a cheaper price that tastes better. And to date, that's never worked. What has worked is somebody made a can that was half the size, twice the price, and tasted like crap. And that was called Red Bull. And so, you go, oh, well, it makes sense. Let's just mash it all up like Accenture or Deloitte, and we'll just have one name. We do it all. But that's not how people buy. People in a really crowded marketplace or fragmented marketplace tend to choose, when possible, something that resonates with them or clearly communicates to them the value or the problem that you're trying to solve. And in today's world, that's even more with search engines and everything else. Like, you'd be like, I need mud flaps for my truck. And you're going to land on some, company that's like, we only do mud flaps for Dodge trucks. I was shopping for mud flaps about a half an hour ago, but the point is, like, I landed on a site like that, and I was more compelled to buy from a site like that. And so for us, being really good at branding and creative, because that's my background. My dad owned an ad agency and a marketing agency and brand. So I kind of understand that. And so we were like, well, we'd rather do a house of brands approach, which is for every offering we build, we should build an entire entity or name or brand that really communicates clearly to the consumer what we do, how we do it, and how we solve their problem. And secondly, the reason I like that approach is we can give more autonomy to that brand too. It doesn't have to get mixed into the monolithic approach of one major brand. It doesn't have to worry about every system in the major brand and how it all plugs in. It can move faster with the market, with the changes. It can adjust itself, and then it gets more autonomy and ownership, so it can thrive in terms of hiring and putting people into it too. Once you build a big monolithic brand, that gets harder and harder and harder to innovate and keep up. So that was our thought there. If Packet wants to, today we had a meeting talking about a new offering for Packet, a new thing that we might be doing over there. None of it Pliancy didn't matter what Pliancy is doing. And now if that wasn't the case and it was one SKU at Pliancy, now we'd be worrying about cannibalizing offerings that Pliancy has or whatever. So we didn't have to go through that. So that's our idea there, is modularization. It's like code, right? One big monolithic piece of software versus a modular piece of software with microservices. So we're kind of taking like a microservices approach to building our offerings.
Okay, you've mixed a bunch of metaphors, and I love it because
My
perhaps no, I actually love it because perhaps what I'm latching on to is the misunderstanding of split out. Because in a way, I was in view when you said that, my initial thought was, oh, that's a fully separate company. It's a completely other thing. But then your use of the house of brands. Well, that actually does imply that there's some shared infrastructure, there's some shared back end, it's potentially one legal entity with lots of positioning to the world. So I'm gonna push a little bit. Define for me what you mean by split up.
So yeah, House of Brands approach more like Procter and Gamble, right? Like you might not want to put Clorox diapers on your baby, right? So, and they have competing products like Pampers and Huggies. One is a luxury and one is like a more commodity. So it's more of, it's not so much separate entities, although we could do that. If we get to the point where one's doing exceptionally well and maybe it's not a core focus we want to do anymore, or maybe it needs funding because it's so successful, whatever it is, we can spin that out much easier because it's its own brand. But for the most part, we share infrastructure. And if you know how Accenture and many of the large, big four, whatever, many years ago, they kind of started adopting a model where they were separate entities buying services from each other. Even though you look at it as just Accenture, so there's complexities behind the scenes on how those things operate. But the real important thing is, how are you communicating to the consumer? How is the consumer understanding your offering and what you do? And of course, by having a house of brands, you get a lot of economies of scale. We only need one invoicing system that we've developed. We only need, one set of salespeople that can communicate. As it gets bigger, there'll be specialists and stuff, but you get the point. It's much easier to reduce the overhead and just focus on the service you deliver to the clients.
Oh yeah, I totally get it, but it's an interesting, different approach, and I want to clear on what we're talking about.
Yep.
I love the idea, and in a way, it actually almost leads into sort of my next sort of follow up, because one of the things we talked about was the potential for MSPs, IT service providers, to become conduits for varying emerging technologies, particularly into the enterprise space, upper mid-market, and a house of brands approach actually would be really well positioned to be able to offer that. It's 2 years later. Where do you see that evolving? Are you doing more of it, in particular, or what are you waiting for?
Yeah.
Or what signs are you looking for? Where are we with that emerging tech channel up into the enterprise?
It starts with autonomy and ownership. You have to give that channel, for us, like let's say it's cloud services or a new security consulting offering that we've been working on. They have to have the autonomy and ownership to focus on like the client without focusing on like the mothership. Meaning, like, don't worry about what Pliancy is doing or how it serves its clients. Just focus on building a product, offering whatever it is that solves the problem you want, and then we as Pliancy can introduce the consumer to that offering. They might choose that or some other competitor, and that's fine. But the idea is that we just want to have these autonomous companies that can move faster with smaller teams. It's hard at 100 people to make any sort of change. I mean, any change we make is a lot of communication and certainly slows it down. And any company that's large has that problem. And this is just one approach for us. We're not the first to do it. There was an MSP in, I think it's Denmark, that did it and then exited for like $1 billion by acquiring. They did a different method of acquiring these separate different companies that did different things, but they kept them all separate and just freshened up their brands and grew the company over the course of like 5 years to be quite a behemoth for such a small country of like 8 million people. But then, of course, the private equity firm that bought them in the end about a year ago said, well, what would be genius? Let's make it one name. And they mashed it all together. And then you go read their Glassdoor and you read comments on areas. Everyone's confused now what they do, because now it's just one name called ITM8. And we do everything for everyone. And that just doesn't work. That's hard to communicate that way. So our approach is just to try and avoid that. Gotcha. And there's overhead that comes with that.
Yeah, no, it's intriguing because you're exactly right. Oftentimes, it gets rolled up and then you think, well, we can just make more value out of it. And in particular, we see it with, you brought up the two words, private equity. Will get involved and then they'll change for whatever reason to run whatever particular playbook. And the subtlety that I've been exploring over the past few years is, look, there are lots of different private equity types and there are lots of different private equity playbooks. They are very different services focused private equity versus product focused ones. And what I kind of wanted to talk about is I want to get your sense, and we're going to kind of focus on both sides of it because they are running very different strategies. They're private equity that is playing over on the product side, that are getting involved with the technologies and tools that providers use. And there's private equity that is involved in the services delivery themselves. You've got some very strong opinions on this. Let's go ahead and dive in. How about we dive in on the services side first, because I think that's a little bit more interesting to see what's happening with people that you would potentially be competing with, or collaborating with. Where have you seen the shift happen on kind of the private equity investment in services in our space?
I mean, it's probably one of the best industries for private equity, given the stickiness of the customer, the growth with, like it outpaces generally the market. You might get 20% growth year over year with these really sticky customers. The customers have a lot of expansion. Expansion is easy revenue. It's fragmented, so they can use money to consolidate. But I think it's getting harder and harder to do that. There's the middle of the market has just been chewed apart. There's a huge divide now between these really small players and then the medium and up. I'm sure there's a couple MSPs out there. I can't think of their names. I know at least one. I think it's RFA in New York that's private and over 100 employees. Almost all have taken private equity and scaled through acquisition. And I think at this point now, all the largest players are 100% owned by private equity. So yeah, they're going to start deploying different playbooks. Private equity will let you do whatever you want so long as it's working. Generally, I'm not a big fan of being involved with private equity when what you're doing isn't working, because then they're going to revert to their playbook. But I do see this huge divide between the small and the medium and up. And I don't know how it's all going to flesh out. And as you know, there's more than one strategy that they're taking. There's the ones that are rolling them all up into one big name. And then there's those that are acquiring them all and keeping their name separate. And the ones that are keeping their name separate are playing the HVAC playbook, which is what private equity did with HVAC and plumbing and others, is they go, people like buying from Tim's small HVAC more than they do, big HVAC Co. Incorporated. And so they started just keeping them all separate because it was A, easier from an integration perspective, and B, it tended to, if you don't like Tim's price, go across the street. We own that one too. So I don't know how it's all going to flesh out, because there hasn't really been any like major exits of the major roll-ups yet. So it's kind of like a wait and see. But I do think that these bigger players have so much more capability to build systems, whether it's on top of ServiceNow, custom software. I mean, there's going to be a big divide. And you might start to see proprietary tooling and solutions take off instead of everyone being hooked to the axe and picks and axes approach of private equity, which is what you mentioned, where it's like, hey, build software for the entire industry. Eventually somebody is going to pivot away from that and build something meaningful that's proprietary. It's a $143 billion market. You could make money on the pick and axes or building your own proprietary software and delivering to the market. It's still a lot of interesting things could happen.
There's a couple of players. I'll give you two more. The guys out at MyTech Partners out in Minneapolis have a bunch of locations, and they haven't taken a penny of private equity. And the guys at 5.9s out in Omaha, Nebraska, also proudly have told me that they have not taken any private equity as well. So,
I'm from Minnesota.
There's a few of you guys out there that I'm keeping track of that are fighting the good fight as full entrepreneurs on the bootstrap model. So I will keep drawing attention.
Must be something in the water in Lake Minnetonka.
Clearly is.
Scandinavian pride.
Let's turn our attention to the other side then. I think we're sort of watching further investment of private equity and seeing them sort of evolve their strategy over on the tool side. I think I could pretty safely say 2 years later, we're in much the same position that we were before, in terms of the tool position. Although I will observe that the only area that I'm seeing a difference in strategy is their AI rollouts. There are some of the large, and I'm going to not name names at this point, but I'll let you if you want to. There's strategies which are much more pricing ones. There are ones where it's an investment, a cautious investment in the technology. And there's a couple, even of private equity invested ones, who are advanced and investing in AI as a differentiator. What's your take on kind of the platform plays over on the software side with private equity?
I wouldn't do it. I would not invest in building your own AI tooling. Think about like Tesla and them shutting down all their charging stations or whatever now. And I may have that wrong, but I thought I had heard somewhere that they're going to be discontinuing that. They only did that to facilitate their product. They're building an electric car. They need charging stations or else people won't buy the car. There's always going to be that middle player. And there's going to be a company that focuses exclusively on building solutions that are AI, and they will serve our market or be close enough that they can be applied to our market, and they'll do a far better job at it. I don't think it would be wise, certainly not this early in the technology, to be spending a lot of money and time trying to figure out how you can use AI to be competitive, because yeah, you might be competitive for a short burst of time, but everyone else will catch up. And it's very expensive and still not even 100% proven. Where we're using AI, and I can't say too much because we're working with another founder and company that's doing
Sure.
it, but and he made me sign an NDA, unfortunately, which I hate signing those. Hey, we've been working on basically using AI more on the operational side. Not so much on the client side, not on how the client interfaces with us, but more like against our large data sets that we have. And we've been dumping data into Looker and BigQuery for years. And we have these huge data sets that we use for predictive things, for looking at trends, for looking at usage patterns. And we use that data for figuring out what offerings clients actually want or use, what the right pricing is going to be. And so, we're looking at like using AI for efficiency. You can infer from that, it's basically related to ticketing, and routing and assigning and resource planning, which is, obviously the biggest expense in any professional services firm is its people, and getting the request to the right people with the right information. That's where we've been using and focusing our AI on. We're not using it yet in production, but that's what we've been looking at.
It makes sense that it would be thematically along the lines of making your text better versus replace your text. Is that you're kind of nodding?
Texts are critical. And the only way to keep the amazing texts is to keep them from resetting passwords.
Right.
The first password you ever reset in your career, Dave, you were probably excited about. You got that first call or whatever it is, that first email, and now you're doing something you've never done before. But by the end of the week, you don't want to reset passwords anymore. There's always somebody excited to do some form of work until they're not anymore because they've outgrown it, or it's not challenging enough or rewarding enough, or whatever it might be. Some of us like me love doing that work because I just love helping people. So I love a good, easy password reset. With our platform, I can have it done in 10 seconds from my phone. So I love that. It's like that reward cue, but not everyone does. The idea is getting the challenge to the right individual as quickly as possible, that is enjoying doing it, can solve it the fastest, and really like learning from that. That's probably saying more than I'm really supposed to say already, but it's routing the resources to the right person, analyzing how the person solves it, and then making sure that you're consistently improving that model.
So let's shift the conversation out to where the money's made, which is the interactions with actual customers. So what are customers asking about or demanding or looking for in solutions driven by AI right now?
Man, I have to be honest, Dave, I'm probably a little too far away from that. I mean, biotech is obviously very curious with it, given the nature of large data sets they work with and just the nature of biotechs. Venture capital hasn't really asked us for their specific business needs and whatnot. So I don't think anyone's had a clear ask. I think everyone's just really curious. And oddly enough, if there is a clear ask, it's more around compliance and security around AI, which is like, how do we do this safely? Or, what are the risks they're taking if we do this? Understanding how they use AI, not so much. And when I say use, I mean like what's happening when I do this, when I put my data here, how do we protect this? Not so much like we want to use AI to do this. We get some customers that do that, but I wouldn't say enough to have like a trend or pattern.
Gotcha. Now, one of the things that in our early conversations that warms my heart so much because we're so simpatico on this is the idea that consulting, kind of the old school consulting and delivering advice is the actual key to delivering really good services. We're again, I wanted to get a sense of has that demand been constant? Is it shifting even faster than you expected? When you look at the kinds of services you're offering out to customers, how much of it is that raw consulting advice component?
Never as much as you want it to be. You can lead the horse to water. The challenge is, it's always been that really great technical people that are passionate about business outcomes really want to do consultative efforts for their clients. And I was obnoxious about it when I started this company many years ago. And with those early clients, I remember pushing, and I told you this before we started going live, I used to build Zoom rooms for free for clients because they would tell me, oh, we don't use video conferencing. And I was like, well, no crap, you don't have it. If you had it, you might really use it and like it. This would have been like 2016, 2015, somewhere in that range. So I started saying, I'll spend all my personal money. We were only like 4 or 5 people at the time. We'll build the Zoom rooms. And if you don't like it, we'll take it all down. And you won't get charged a penny for any of the labor or anything. And it always led to 4 more Zoom rooms by the end of the month being built, because they loved it. They're like, this is game changing, et cetera. And we had to do that with cloud stuff back in the day as well. We pushed for them to try cloud storage instead of this or that. So that consultative thing is really tough because oftentimes like the customers aren't like, oh, really cloud? Yeah, let's do that. Or, oh, Zoom room, $5,000. Yeah, let's do it. You have to like really work at it, convince them. And the foundation to even have that conversation is trust. First, the client has to trust you and they have to trust what you're selling them is, and that starts with consulting. If you have a consultative thing, you have a named person you're working with, you've built rapport. That's like the easiest way to then work with them to get them to adopt change and do things. If it's around about different IT person via help desk nonstop, you're not going to build that rapport as much. It's going to be far more challenging. So for us, we think the consultative approach allows you to then build deeper relationships with the client, which then allows you to introduce technology at a more rapid rate, which then gives the clients a more competitive advantage. When COVID hit, none of our clients had to make a single change. They were all pure cloud, already using Zoom, already had all the technology, and they did a lot of thanking to us when that happened. And we were also like the next morning, like, oh, the world has changed and we didn't have to change anything. So, ultimately, that's why I like consulting. Getting clients to see that value is not easy. They don't come to you with like, we need a great IT consultant that can help steward technology for us. They come to you because Bill, the CEO, can't get his laptop working and they got an important thing and they just need help. So it's still not easy to sell that. Every IT guy that leaves and wants to start their own practice thinks that they're going to build some amazing IT consultative thing. And it's like, oh, it's an uphill battle. It takes a long time and we've been doing it for a long time and it's still really challenging.
If it was easy, everyone would be doing it all the time and it would then also have turned into a commodity. So there's a ton of stuff I wanted to talk about. What's most on your mind these days?
I mean, the economy, obviously managing expectations with team members, employees, clients. I mean, there's just so much volatility out there right now. So it's been really hard to meet the expectations of clients, employees, and others when everyone had like a very clear goal of grow and do new things and whatever. And then like now different people react to like this market and the challenges differently. Some still have that, hey, I want this, more challenges, I want to grow. And others are like fearful of like their jobs and, what's going on. It's like impossible to manage expectations really efficiently in a volatile world like this. And that's what's been really like keeping me up at night is like, how do you manage 100 people that all have different wants and needs and are all reacting to this economy and what's going on in the world so differently? It's been an eye-opening and very challenging experience.
Yeah, it's very difficult to read the tea leaves on the economy because it's good and bad all at the same time, and many of our indicators are trailing, right? And so we're always trying to figure out exactly where it goes. And there's some that are promising, and there's some that are not. It seems very industry specific. It seems circumstance specific. I can find examples of poor performance. I can also find examples of really good performance. And there is elements of opportunity, but nothing is straightforward. And so you're totally right on that. It's why I cover as much of the economic data that I do on Mondays, because it's just, we're looking for the patterns and they are not as clear as we might hope them to be.
Yep.
Do you have any particular, I mean, is it just an obvious signs of recovery? Do we think, that there are certain things you're looking for that will start making you feel better about the conditions on the ground?
Yeah. When, I tread carefully around feel better. But, ultimately these all have a pattern. They all have a cycle. And generally once it hits Main Street, you're kind of at the bottom and then, it starts to go up from there, not rapidly, but everyone's just looking for when can we be confident that we're always going to go this way. And once again, not rapidly, but just consistently. And people can't make decisions when the data is all over the place. It just creates paralysis, and paralysis makes it hard to do anything. You don't want to buy a home and the interest rates are high. You got to wait for them to come down. But if they come down, then the house prices go up. And, and like that, just when people are in a scenario like that, it's just very, very taxing mentally. And everybody gets worn out and it's really, really exhausting. And so, yeah, it's been really hard for us because the data, for example, we had an amazing quarter following after a disastrous quarter, and all the data would have said, why wouldn't the disaster continue? It didn't. It went the opposite way. And I was talking to the CEO of a really large MSP, and he's like, yeah, we had a 17% growth in that quarter. And I said, we had 15. And it made me recognize, like, this is macro stuff here. This is, when you get to our size, I mean, you're dealing with a lot of macros, stuff that's outside of your control. And it's impacting others of that same size in a similar way. If you're a smaller company, you can compartmentalize. You might get really lucky in that the 6-7 clients you have aren't impacted, and then therefore you're not. But when you get to our size, or even larger, obviously, you're impacted by all these macro events. And it's all psychological, all of it. People get afraid and sell the stocks, and that thing creates a thing. And then somebody goes, oh, this is a great opportunity. So, I mean, it's just been whiplash for like 2.5 years. It's been really hard to plan. It's been really hard to meet expectations for employees. You have a great quarter and you want to now invest and like spend on employees and promotions and things, but then half of them are like, no, it's not, because what if? And then the other half are like, finally, I've been working my butt off. And like, you're in the middle, like, I don't know what to do. The data could go either way in the morning. So yeah, it's been really exhausting, for sure.
No.
And I'm not the only one going through it.
No, you certainly aren't. And I always fall back. My colleague, Carl Palachuk, always likes to quote that you are an economy of one, and that there are certain things that you can focus on and control, and that attitude does often help. Marcus, this has been great fun to catch up. I want to make sure that I'm going to have you back a little bit more soon than 2 years out, particularly because we're going to be doing a few more of these as panel discussions. So I look forward to continued conversations. Really appreciate you joining me today.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I always love talking shop.
Well, I want to make sure there was an interview I just did with Cody Schneider, the CEO of Draft Horse AI and Swell AI, who shared his insights on automating workflows using artificial intelligence. In particular, we talked about the idea of iterative advancements, and we also talked about the idea of churn. Here's a preview of that interview.
Of action is like the biggest measurement of client satisfaction. Like if they ask for something or you promise something, like how quickly you can get that out to them is what's that's like the only thing that I've ever found to be directly correlated with reducing churn and the longevity of that client staying with you. And so when you think about that in relationship to the products or implementing these services for your clients, it's then coming back to, okay, well, what is even if it's not all the way there perfect, and this is hard for everybody, right? We want to do good work, and we want it to be, that's our work is basically a measurement of our value, like the quality that we put out there. Like we've even found this where it's like, every once in a while, it's just going to totally mess up, right? And we just have to kind of be okay with that. And also that creates just a high impact activity that you can do for these people.
Cody had some really good ideas about the way to apply technology in a very iterative, advanced way, as well as applying artificial intelligence. And I'd encourage you to check out that interview. It's available right now on both the podcast feed and on the YouTube feed. And remember, my Patreon supporters get these all early. If they want to dive in, you can visit patreon.com/MSP Radio to find out more and sign up. And I want to thank Sales Builder, our Patreon sponsor, whose support makes this show possible. Focus on your IT sales workflow with the power of automation and visit them at salesbuilder.com. That's BUILDR.com. And vendors, you too can get your name mentioned on the live show. It's a simple monthly subscription. Visit patreon.com/MSP Radio to learn more. And listeners, the best thing you can do to support the show is like, share, and follow on your favorite platforms. And if you want to go further, you can support directly on Patreon with our Give What You Want model. You set what you think the content is worth. If you have a question and are listening to the recording, send it in at question@mspradio.com. Thanks for joining me today on the Business of Tech Lounge, and I will see you next time.